So when a wizard walks into a room and says fireball as their first course of action, besides the memes, there is a very obvious reason why they want to do this. So we set aside the murder hobo. We set aside the fact that it's probably problematic to cast fire into a room as your first course of business. It's a powerful spell. And if you have rested for the day, if you know that you will only have one combat, there is no reason not to just blow all your most powerful spells. This is a game design challenge. It's been this way for a long time as we've slowly moved away from the attrition-based ideals that Dungeons and Dragons used to have and more toward one-shot gameplay or the idea that whenever you're walking into a combat situation, you're kind of like refreshed and ready to go. In Distal, this is a very specific problem that I wanted to account for. I call it a problem because it's not the ideal style of gameplay for what I'm going for. I want there to be attrition. I want there to be reasons to use higher level spells, but not necessarily allow them to do more damage. And you'll see a lot of that as we go through it. Oh, and for those who don't know, I'm Wrel, the creator of Distal, a TTRPG built on hardships, not heroes. So in Distal, there's a mechanical framework that prevents some of this heavy alpha damage right out the gate from happening. First of which, the big important one, is that we stagger initiative. So somebody from my team goes, somebody from your team goes, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until everybody has gone. And then it loops through the established initiative order. So the second structural component that keeps all of this working is that spells in Distal are meant to broaden in capability, but not necessarily become more powerful over time. So we use what are called invocations to cast spells, and then we bucket spells into tiers. So your cantrips, they don't cost an invocation. They also don't do anything combat related. For most of the combat spells, they actually live in this low magic tier. So this is one invocation to cast. And again, invocations are like spell slots. You don't tend to have a lot of them as a spellcaster, but you gain more of them over time. You will cast a spell. It'll do some damage here in this combat tier, but these later tiers, they don't focus on damage in the vast majority of situations at all. Instead, they allow you to exert your will on the world, and it becomes more possible the higher up in tier that you go. If we look at a cantrip, I'm going to go through kind of the whole spell situation so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. But for example, if we look at cantrips, we got some really cool stuff like a diving bubble. So as an action, you create an air bubble around you and you can go underwater. You can create an arcane tool. So if you need like a hammer or a crowbar or that sort of thing, you can make that. And these things last until dismissed, and also they're limited by, we call them utilities. So you create one, it is always there. But if you want to create a second utility, you can't do that unless you get rid of the first one. But torchlight to create light, bone rattle to convince the dead to or like sneak past the dead, heat cloak that allows you to avoid getting cold in the winter. Really cool set of cantrips here. But when we move into low magic, the way that I balance this is generally, if we look at so we balance based on action economy. So an action is the most important part of a character's turn economy. There's also, what's the equivalent of a bonus action? We call it an instinct. And then there's a twist, which is essentially a reaction. So your action, you can make an attack, and we always let you attack with both weapons. So if you're dual wielding weapons, you can strike with both. And because of that, we kind of have an idea of the amount of damage that you could be dealing if you're using weapons. And we want to make sure that any damage that we do is kind of on par with what you're capable of if you were to just be using weapons. So for example, if we compare a character that has like if you're optimizing, you'd have a long sword in one hand and maybe a short sword in another. So like a 1d8 and then 1d6. And so at the bare minimum, we want to give you like 2d6 worth of damage. And you add your stats twice per hit, but we kind of, some of it comes out in the wash. So for example, as a way to use your action, instead of making a weapon attack, you'll be making a spell attack, and you can spontaneously ignite somebody from a distance. And we're going to deal 2d6 plus fortitude fire damage and then the target begins burning even on a miss. And you'll see this thread repeated in numerous spells that even on a miss, we want you to do something because you're spending an invocation. So that save or suck mentality is something that we try to avoid because there is a resource cost, and typically as well as your chance to fail or succeed. So this is a very average moment of damage. If we have spells that require some setup to do, then we know that we can elevate the damage to justify that there needed to be some setup or some delay, and we can make them more punchy. So for example, as an action with Falling Blade, you can conjure a luminescent blade of force that hangs 10 foot above a target. The blade falls on your next turn, forcing the occupants to avoid, which means to like roll out of the way. This is their save, essentially, taking this much damage. And this is a pretty significant amount of damage. So 3d8 this would be probably like 2d8 with a two-handed weapon is about the top that you get if you're using an attack. So this is very powerful, and it deals half on a success, or rather half on a successful save, if they avoid it. So it's always going to do something, but on their turn, they could just move. So the setup that would be required is that they need to be stationary and capable of moving, or have somebody has used a spell to like pin that target. And because we know that there is some combined efforts, then we know that we can get away with dealing more damage because the payoff will feel better. At the same time, we don't necessarily want you to cast a spell and then totally like nothing at all happens, but that is kind of the cost or the catch for this spell. But as a twist, again, this is a reaction. When a creature attempts to leave the space, you can force the blade to fall, reducing its damage to only 1d8 plus int arcane when doing so. So if somebody tries to leave that space, you can say like, okay, I'm going to burn part of my action economy or my turn economy and just make the blade immediately fall instead of waiting till next turn. So we're creating choices that you can take on, and you're figuring out how to make the best use of your turn economy. And we want to justify that with damage so that it feels good that you've spent a resource doing it. As we move on to the tier 2, you'll see that the mentality changes a lot. So these spells become more powerful, but useful for specific situations. Redirect energy, I really like this spell. As a twist, so like a reaction, to an incoming spell attack that targets only you, you can redirect the spell at a nearby target or a space. This acts as a spell attack for you. So if you are trying to avoid taking damage, you can redirect energy and just punt it into a square nearby, a space nearby, or you can direct it at an enemy, potentially back at the caster if you're up close to them. And because of that, while it doesn't have the strict damage that a spell from the first tier might be inflicting, it's still a way to cause damage, but more importantly, protect yourself. So you're gaining more utility, and the action economy use here is justified as well. Planar Shove is another spell that is too powerful to justify being in a tier 1 bucket, but has dramatic effects on combat. So you use an action, you make a spell attack against a creature. On a hit, you push them, and then you banish them to a different plane. And you can channel them, so you just keep them there until they can deny the effect on their own. So you push them away, they stay there. This can be anything from like a boss. If you need time to take get your characters back up, your allies, because they fell down, or if you're just trying to limit the amount of enemies on the field, you channel that, and then you can still do other things as long as you don't move. So channeling is like kind of like concentration, except it's stationary. And it's yet another example of a spell that doesn't quite fit in the tier 1 bucket and has really dramatic uses that you can see used in like any sort of fight where you're on the ropes and you need some time to breathe. Wall of Vines, Path of Fire. These are spells that help you manipulate the battlefield. Heartbreak this is just one that I really enjoy. When somebody dies, you target one of their allies. This is like as a reaction, as a twist. and inflict inconsolable feelings of loss and despair. Basically, you jack them all up emotionally, and very likely they're going to flee the battlefield. And this lasts until they shake the effect. There's a lot of like battlefield manipulation going on in tier 2. So as we move on to high magic, this is when, so in the previous tier, there's still like a lot of checks that make sure that the enemies still kind of have like a fighting chance. But in high magic, some of that goes away. Not always, but you'll see that you are able to exert your will on the world and just change reality a little bit. So strip immunity. As an action, choose one known immunity or resistance on a creature in your domain. That's a very large range. And attempt to strip it from the target. If it's a resistance, it's removed, period. If an immunity is chosen, the target has to curtail this, or the immunity, and this is very high DC. The effect of the immunity is removed. On a success, the immunity instead becomes a resistance. So like you always get some effect of this. So at the start of combat, if you know that the big fire lord is immune to fire and you have a pyromaniac on your team, then you probably want to strip away that fire immunity, and then bare minimum, it becomes a resistance instead of an immunity. Another fun one is alter weather. So as an action, you evoke extreme weather, which is it's a condition, or it's like a battery of conditions. So you can have extremely cold weather, extreme heat, or a downpour. And depending on what extreme weather you create, it's going to cause problems for the entire battlefield. So downpour, for example, people can get their boots stuck in mud. If it's cold, depending on what type of armor that they're wearing, it becomes difficult to, they take damage over time. For heat, they might become fatigued if they're wearing like really heavy armor. And when you are fatigued, you lose your action, your ability to attack. This is a really fun one down here, high magic. So again, this is tier 3, and you're spending 3 invocations. But this one allows you to summon a bolt of lightning. I talked about how in the first tier, that's mostly where the damage is being done. There aren't too many instances in which you're dealing damage-related spells outside of that tier, but defibrillate is one of them. So you can strike a creature, object, or space for 2d12 intelligence lightning, and it begins burning. This is this just happens. So you will immediately deal damage. 3 invocations is a lot, no matter how you slice it. And you can alternatively use it to stabilize a dying, unconscious ally at 1 health, plus any previous healing in the round. So it can be used to defibrillate an ally. And again, this just happens. It's nothing that they need to roll. They're just going to take some damage, and it's gonna hurt and set you on fire. But beside a rare example like this, you are mostly using these high magic spells to really change circumstances to benefit you. So at Lost Magic, this is tier 4, all these spells, the premise behind Lost Magic is that, as the name would imply, you do not have access to this. You cannot learn this unless you undergo some quest and like learn how to cast a spell. It's things like craft phylactery, and there's a lot of morally questionable things that you have to do to become essentially a lich and create a phylactery for yourself. And every one of these spells, every one of them, yeah, I think so, should feel like a quest. So for example, destroy artifact. As a major downtime activity, attune a masterwork mace, warhammer, or maul to a place of power. So you have to know that there's a place of power. And then you attune it. It becomes capable of damaging an invulnerable object while in that place. So this is taking the ring and bringing it to Mount Doom so that you could, in Mount Doom you just throw it on the fire. You take it somewhere and then you hit it with a hammer and then it explodes. Like this is what that spell is. So if you had a quest or a campaign, for example, knowing that there is a lich's phylactery or maybe some sort of ancient relic that is invulnerable to damage, the quest that the party might have is to go figure out how to destroy it. So you might have to learn this spell. Where do you learn this spell? Well, it's left in some ancient archive somewhere or deep beneath a mountain or, That is the quest, and then you're able to go to the place of power and then take care of this ancient relic. If you were trying to survive an invasion from another empire, like campaign level stuff, then you might be on a quest to learn how to create a citadel of force, which is like a big magic bubble, and it requires a bunch of magic to be dumped into it every day so that it remains powered. This might be something that you need to learn so that you can survive the onslaught coming your way. So these are the ideas behind these high level lost magic spells that you would learn. Every tier of magic should have a purpose. At least in Distal it does. Where it's an expression of the control that you have over your circumstances, your expression of control over the world. And damage to that end isn't interesting. Finding new ways to hurt people is probably like the least interesting kinds of spells that you could use or that you could create, but at the same time, they're necessary. So we keep them very accessible in the first tier, and then based on the flow of combat, knowing that you go, I go, you go, I go, it's going to be a constant like use of spells, and you won't feel bad about using your best spells, the ones that cost the most invocations, because they set you up, they set your circumstances up to do other things. They are not the fireball that deals all the damage and then kills all the enemies. So let me know what you think. We do keep the balance pretty tight in tier 1. And even in like cantrips, it's very intentional what you're capable of doing. It gets more loose and versatile the further up, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, the further up you go. But that's because of the cost. And that's because it's meant to give you options, to give you control. Let me know how you feel about this idea and whether or not it jives with you. Or, if you just like blowing stuff up, maybe you can tell me about that too in the comments below. Thanks very much, folks. Wrel signing off.